So this morning's list of destructions fills one with despair. Anything I could say at this point would be ineffectual. I spent most of my adult life studying iconoclasm, and the scale of what Daesh has wrought and continues to wreak is unparalleled. Though not, I should say, as you all know, without precedent. All I can offer are some aspects of my own researches that may illuminate some of the broader issues at stake in any study of iconoclasm. When I began working on the subject in 1969, it was almost totally neglected, except perhaps amongst Byzantinists. The only general book that then existed was Julius von Feeg's Die Bilderstürmer of 1915. When my fellow scholars heard that I was working on iconoclasm in the Reformation, especially in the Netherlands, they asked, how can an art historian be working on the destruction of images? Art historians are supposed to deal with the wonders and beauties of art, with what art means to people. I restrained myself from suggesting that the will to destroy art often provides quite precise testimony to what art actually means to people, from love and desire to hate, anger, and resentment. Well, of course, things have changed now. So in working, I'll come to Daesh again later on, but in working on iconoclasm in the Netherlands, in Germany, and then in many other places from South America to South Africa, two questions in particular struck me, and they seemed applicable to other cases of iconoclasm as well. When the mob rushed in to destroy the images in Antwerp Cathedral on the night of August the 21st, 1566, the event that really marked the beginning of the revolt against Spain, and destroyed everything within reach, pictures, sculptures, let's hope I get, there we go, hope you can see it. So they really, I mean, this is more than Susan's Dirk van Dalen, which I saw at the end. I mean, they really destroyed everything within reach, pictures, sculptures, stained glass, books, vestments, everything that pertained to the infidels of the Catholic Church, and attacked the priests and other servants of that hated religion. Did they do so spontaneously, or were they organized? I'll show you another slightly later image of that violent destruction in one night. And if they were organized, to what degree and on what basis? These are questions that go back to the beginnings of iconoclasm in both West and East. As always in such cases, there is plenty of evidence of the theology behind it, and that theology, it also seemed to me, had much in common with other outbursts. Underlying it all were two things: not only the many scriptural injunctions against images, the fear of idolatry, the threat of polytheism, but two even more basic motivations. Firstly, the fear of representing in material form what is essentially divine and uncircumscribable. Hence the endless Catholic justifications of images in terms of the incarnation of Christ. Hence the Protestant response that only God can make living images, and that these images, of course, are us, living humans, made in his own image. Hence, too, the Hadith's resistance to image making on the grounds that it is only God who can breathe life into material form, so that, for example, when the artist reaches heaven, he will be instructed to breathe life into his creations, and then, failing to do so, will be cast into hell. Secondly, comes the related insistence that paintings, sculptures, mosaics, indeed all material representations are, in the end, nothing more than dead pieces of wood and stone, and cannot possibly have the life or powers attributed to them. So this, the notion that works of art, images, are just dead pieces of works in stone, remains one of the basic motivations of all iconoclastic action. That action is to demonstrate that images are indeed dead, that they have no power, and that their vitality is a fiction. At the same time, the mere act of destruction testifies to their power and hold over us. Despite their dead matrices, they are redemptive in one way or another. They move us to fear, they make us weep, or inspire us to action. Life sometimes somehow inheres within them, and the person, saint, or deity they show can have the powers to save, convince, and even strike back. I found in my files this rather striking picture of President Marcos being attacked by an iconoclast because he seems to be threatening the iconoclast. That's the life in the image. No wonder they are often attacked, particularly when they are representations or even the symbols of a hated leader or regime. Often, of course, the emperor or tyrant is believed, as in the old Roman doctrine, to be in his image or to go where he goes. I'll come back to architecture later on, but it is this sense of the living in the image that also lies at the basis of the powers attributed to images and the faith in them, of the Stendhal syndrome that makes you swoon when you see something wonderful or potentially eschatological, of pornography, of empathy for the wounded, of the ways in which mere dead pieces of wood and stone can save lives and be worthy, as in the case of ex votos, of being thanked for saving one's nearest and dearest. It is for such reasons that I have always said that the love and hate of images are always two sides of the same coin, that the will to destroy testifies to the acknowledgement of their power, their usefulness, and their potential for exploitation. In the dreadful and all too famous video showing soldiers of Daesh destroying images, I just showed two stills, in the museum in Mosul, the iconoclasts chant, as if to justify their actions, that one, the Prophet, peace be on him, ordered us to remove and obliterate statues. Two, and his companions did the same thing after him when they conquered countries. Three, and the monuments you see behind me, said the leader at that occasion, are but statues and idols of the people from previous centuries which they used to worship instead of God. Standard stuff. These warped references to the Hadith and to the traditional charges of idolatry are all too predictable, alas. But then the Daesh editor or producer adds a further novel comment, as if in realization of the fact that not even a strict interpretation of tradition can justify what they are doing. He says, they chant, these statues and idols were not here at the time of the Prophet or his companions. They have been excavated by Satanists. Damnation of archaeologists, if ever. But these are not, of course, the sole reasons for these awful scenes, if there are any reasons at all. How can theology account for such vandalism? This question runs through almost the entire history of image destruction. For the fact is that, like Daesh's terrible executions, these are actions chosen for their shock effect, for publicity, to make people scared, to attract rebels, and so on. Playing into the hands of the very people who seem to know best how to use and abuse images in our times, I refer to Daesh, the New York Times refers to them as the latest eye-catching destruction. As in very many other attacks on images, theology is only a cover for the desire for publicity, or simply to draw attention to oneself, as often in the case of disturbed individuals as well. It was the same at Bamiyan in 2001, for example, when the attacks were first justified in terms of breaking down the idols of a pagan religion. All we are breaking are stones, said Mullah Omar of the attack on the Colossi. It's not a big deal. The statues are only objects made of mud and stone, said his Minister of Culture. But then they admitted that they were only doing this to draw attention to their cause. And they added to the children destroyed by American bombings. In all of this, of course, interestingly and bitterly enough, canonicity counts. The higher the status of the work and the more canonical, the better it serves the purposes of drawing attention either to oneself or to a cause. Time and again, even individual psychopaths admit that they choose to attack works such as the Night Watch in Amsterdam, the Dürers and Rembrandts in Munich and Kassel, either because they were the most beautiful or because they are the best-known works of art in the museum, or the Gates of Nineveh and the Winged Lions, or the blowing up of the marvelous temple of Baal Shamim at Palmyra. But in the end, it's the body that lies at the basis of all attacks on images, even on abstract ones, because abstract forms can often seem organic, natural, anthropomorphic, theriomorphic, or simply physiognomic. They can contain and reveal the elements of emotion perceived through the body. Every crash of an image to the ground in the Mosul video, every splitting open of the head, produces a shudder in the beholder's body, as another piece of stone plunges to the floor and smashes. Every use of a pneumatic drill to erase a face, or to pierce the flesh in the stone, or worse, to put its thundering bit in the eyes of these victimized images, generates a visceral and interoceptive response, a response within the body. Even though we know they are dead pieces of stone, we react as if they are somehow real. This, by the way, is not the imagining of response, not just an impression. We now know that such responses are not just intuitive, they are plottable in terms of the cortical correlates of bodily responses to images. We feel, spectators feel, the violent assaults and piercings on the bodies of others, and even the threats to him, that hammer poised to smash down on someone. Sorry, I wanted to show you this. What's happened? I've lost a very important image, too bad. Well, what I wanted to show you was actually a hammer poised to smash down on someone in a Goya print, where seeing the hammer about to collapse, to drop on someone, you have a sense that it's about to drop on you, and we know the cortical correlates of this. Daesh knows what it's doing in its use and manipulation of images. Unconsciously, perhaps, but very effectively. But now we have become habituated, by now we have still not become habituated, at least I hope not, to the depredations in Mosul, in Hatra, and in Nineveh, precisely because of this. We have them engraved in our memory, in our somatosensory as well as our narrative memory, the shock with which we respond to the hammers brought down upon those beautiful, seemingly living images of the past. Susan showed this painting by, this engraving by Martin van Heemskerk, which is really quite remarkable. I'm showing it to you because you have a sense of the action of this hammer on the stone. Here, this of course is the statue of Saddam Hussein coming down, which was orchestrated by the Americans, another topic. And there, of course, we have the destruction of the Temporal Bow in the 16th century version. What I would have shown you, if we had time to discuss it, I would have shown you see this boy peeing as an act of disdain into the mouth of the head of Hercules. I have a picture of the spectators peeing into the mouth of Saddam Hussein as his head came down as well. Such are the continuities in the history of this terrible story. So here's another hammer, where you have a sense of bodily involvement in that action, despite oneself. Though digitized and frequently reproduced, these images remain invested with corporeality and testify not only to the ways in which the body is perceived in the image, but also to the force with which they generate a bodily response. Is it only because of the art we feel we are losing when these people destroy the images that we shudder? Or is it because it's the way in which we, living respondents, incarnate in our own bodies, respond to the assault on the bodies in these images? Well, yes and no. We respond partly because of the skill of the artist, partly because of the history of the objects, and partly because of the sheer visceral reaction to the sight of what seems to be a body made of the same material as ourselves. One of the most striking aspects of this phenomenon is that they account for the persistence of forms of iconoclastic assault, from the poking out of the eyes to the sewing up of the mouth to the elimination of the face. So I just make a quick diversion here to show you, I think this was discussed briefly earlier, that shock at assaults on images is not new. Here is poking out of the eyes of Erasmus in the edition of one of his works by a Reformation censor. You eliminate the life in the image by taking out the eyes, and it's exactly the same as the crossing out and sewing up of the mouth, same techniques, same attacks on the body that we find in, this is of course the crossing out of the face, the sewing up of the mouth, and the elimination of the eyes, those tokens of life, those vital signs of life in a dead image that are removed by the iconoclast. So this, of course, is in 2011. Of course, we now know the hypotheses that the destruction of the images in Mosul, in Hatra, in Nineveh, and elsewhere may have been, Palmyra, may have been motivated by the profits to be gained, we've discussed this, from selling what remains from the destructions, and that the constant proclamations that they are idolatrous may have been calculated to appeal to the fundamentalists. But in fact, they serve, as we've seen, quite strategically, to fire up both their supporters and their enemies. The shock value of these deliberately choreographed events depend above all for their effect on their association with the living and the ease with which both can now be eliminated. From the beginnings of iconoclasm, we've seen how those who are associated with images and who seek to preserve them are destroyed along with the very images and art they seek to protect. Let me remind you of how often the destruction of images has accompanied the murder of those associated with them in the past as well as in the present. In the Netherlands in 1566, the destruction of images was followed by murder, first of the guardians of images, then by all those perceived. There's the destruction again, and then the hangings of all those, and the impalings of the heads you can see too, all those associated with them. There too, if you protected a picture, you were aligned with the political and religious forces it betokened, just as in the awful case of the great, I don't know whether in the time I was absent this morning you mentioned him, but he deserves a tribute, great Syrian inspector of art and architecture in Palmyra. You mentioned him this morning. Yeah.
No, I'm just showing you.
Oh, you're giving me time. I'm trying to pay a tribute to someone. Like so many other, just as in the awful case of the great Syrian inspector of art and architecture in Palmyra, whose name, like so many other victims, deserves to be recalled again, the 82-year-old Khalil al-Assad. So, and then in the 16th century, the killings spread to all those regarded as representatives of the old religion, of a religion that had become heathen again. I'll move to the conclusion which seems to me important. This brings us to iconoclasm in the age of digital reproduction. ISIS has excelled in every use of images in the age of digitization. It's exploited them for recruitment and propaganda. It's made cruel and terrifying use of the effectiveness of images in conveying a sense of the living body by multiplying the images of destroying art. The horrendous attacks in Paris were preceded by attacks on images, and the attacks on images preceded by attacks on people. Images stand at the center of their propaganda and their recruitment of both people and souls. Life was believed to inhere in images, and so they were destroyed in order to show that they were merely dead, containing no vitality after all. It's as if in the age of digitization, people are reduced to the status of mere images, even more easily destructible than they always had been. The old conflation of image and the living lies at the basis of Daesh's iconoclasm and its awful reduction of its opponents, real or imagined, to the status of mere images. They and their souls are as easily removed in our age as digitized images. We can destroy both images and people with equal ease. We can both promote ourselves and remove others with a press of the trigger or a button on a digital camera, a computer, or a bomb. Iconoclasm in our age goes together with murder. The conflation of representation and reality has finally been achieved. Its path to pathos and death smoothed by the ease with which we digitize everything, by which images have been reduced to mere digits, mere unembodied ciphers. But of course they're not. I'll withhold my conclusion because I can see the signal, my 2 minutes is up. But I would conclude by saying that the problem remains that, as in all fundamentalisms, the hard problem of how to make theology and theodicy irrelevant except as objects of study remains. Michael Baxendall, the great art historian, once asked me what theology had to do with images. I looked at him in amazement and said, everything. In the end, he too, for all his skepticism, could not but acknowledge that, as must we. Thank you.